Almost everything that breathed was dead. On a summer morning in 1986, villages near Lake Nyos in Cameroon fell into an impossible silence. People were found in their beds, on footpaths, and beside their homes. Cattle lay motionless in the fields, and birds had fallen from the trees. More than 1,700 people were dead. Nothing was destroyed, and even the bodies showed no obvious injuries. It looked as if life had simply been switched off. The killer was still there in the distance, calm and blue. Lake Nyos. Lake Nyos sat deep inside a volcanic crater in northwestern Cameroon in Africa, surrounded by lush hills and quiet farms. It was simply part of everyday life. Cattle grazed along its slopes, and children grew up with its peaceful water in the distance. On the night of August 21st, 1986, nothing seemed unusual. Work was finished, fires were dimmed, and the villages around the lake settled into an ordinary night. Then, sometime after dark, a sound came from the water. A heavy rumble echoed across the crater, low and deep, vibrating through the earth. Most stayed inside. To them, it sounded like distant thunder. While the valley slept, a pale cloud began to spill over the crater's rim. It stayed close to the ground, flowing down into the valleys below. It moved like a silent tide, seeping through grass, curling around doorways, and slipping into homes where people were trying to sleep. For most, there was no time to react. They slipped from sleep into unconsciousness. Some were still awake. The air became a suffocating heaviness, making every breath smaller than the last. They reached for doors, for loved ones, but their limbs gave way before they could understand the danger. The animals were affected just as quickly. Cattle tied near houses grew unsteady and dropped where they stood. Even the dogs stopped barking. One house after another. One breath after another. By morning, the survivors were surrounded by questions. They stepped outside and found the world transformed into a graveyard. With no visible enemy, people began looking for someone to blame. Some believed the water had been poisoned. Others feared a weapon, something man-made. In villages farther away, fear quickly turned into anger. If an entire valley could die overnight, then someone had to be responsible. But for others, the explanation was older. A curse, a restless spirit, a punishment from the lake itself. But among the bodies and the grief, there was a detail that didn't fit. The deaths hadn't spread evenly. Some homes were wiped out, while the house next door remained untouched. People in the low hollows died in their beds, while others, just a few meters higher, survived to see the sun. What looked random was the first real clue. The pattern followed the land, and to understand how that was possible, you have to look beneath the surface of Lake Nyos. For centuries, volcanic gases deep beneath the lake had been leaking carbon dioxide into the water. Under the immense pressure of the deep, the gas didn't bubble away, it stayed trapped. On the night of the disaster, something disturbed the balance. The pressure broke, and, all at once, more than 1 million tons of carbon dioxide escaped from the depths of the lake. A massive cloud burst out of the lake, carrying water and gas high into the air. But because CO2 is heavier than normal air, it quickly sank back to the ground. It flowed over the crater's rim like an invisible waterfall, rushing down the hillsides at nearly 70 kilometers per hour. As the cloud moved, it pushed the oxygen out of the air. The victims in low areas were breathing air with far too much carbon dioxide and far too little oxygen. Within moments, the brain began to shut down, and if the exposure lasted long enough, the heart stopped. That is why the deaths followed the shape of the land. Lake Nyos had not exploded, it had exhaled. To geologists, Lake Nyos was a warning, and it is not the only one of its kind. The most famous is Lake Kivu, on the border between Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo. It is far larger, and millions of people live in the region around it. Today, Lake Kivu is closely monitored. It is not treated as an immediate disaster waiting to happen, but the reason it is watched so carefully is because Nyos proved what these lakes can do. If a lake like Kivu were ever to exhale, we would not be talking about a few villages. We would be talking about a humanitarian catastrophe on a completely different scale. In a dense city, the difference between life and death could come down to something terrifyingly small. A basement apartment could become a tomb. A single flight of stairs could be the line between a survivor and a casualty. After the disaster at Lake Nyos, engineers had to find a way to tame the pressure. In 2001, they installed pipes reaching deep into the water, allowing carbon dioxide to rise slowly and safely to the surface. Instead of waiting for the lake to exhale all at once, they made it breathe constantly, quietly, controlled. Danger does not always announce itself. Sometimes it sits in plain sight, calm enough to trust, until the air itself turns against you.